Hello everyone, this is Vaibhav Sharma. On behalf of the government, on behalf of the Department of Law, Government Mahindra College, I would like to welcome all of you to the first national workshop on learning the art of mooting. My name is Vaibhav Sharma. I'm a practicing advocate, have been practicing for about 11 years now. I'm an alumni of the Army Institute of Law and have been practicing law ever since at the Punjab and Haryana High Court as well as the Supreme Court of India. Now, I would first like to thank the Honorable Principal, Dr. Simrat Kaur, the Head of the Law Department, Dr. Joginder Paul, and the teacher in charge, Mr. Sanjeev Mehta, for this opportunity to be amongst all of you and talk to you. Now, ideally, this would have been in a situation where all of us would have been together and I would be able to see all of you, interact with all of you. But given the circumstances and given that this will have to be a webinar, and I'm literally talking to a camera and I have no idea if you were even able to listen to what I have to say, I would make 2 or 3 requests. Number one, please feel free to comment, because that is exactly how I will find out if I am reaching through to you, if I am clear, and that if you have any questions. The second, I am extremely pleased to see that we not only have students from the Government Mahindra College in Patiala, but students from all across the country as well. So that really fills my heart. And what I also see is that there are a lot of students who are in the first year, the second year, the fourth year. And so we have a good mix of students who've either are complete novices to moot courts and those who've done a few moot courts, because I'm assuming till about the 3rd or the 5th or the 4th year, you would have had some experiences. I see Nitin's comment that I'm audible and clear, so that's great. Thank you, Nitin. Now, the first thing which I want to deal with is mooting. Now, I don't know, in an interactive session, I would have probably asked you how many of you have actually done moots, what is your experience of moots, and therefore I could have probably tailored my talk more towards the technicalities or the basics. But given that we have this uniform mix of students and I have no idea what part of mooting would you like me to concentrate on, let me take it from the top and move into issues which will be common for everyone. Now, I see that right now all of you are in the process of putting in your attendance or your name so that your presence is recorded. Once all of this is done, I would request that you also, or even now, please start giving comments and please tell me if you want me to stop on something and to explain something further, or if you have anything which you want me to address immediately and not at the end of the lecture. Now, I have been given a set of few questions which I will address towards the later half. But for now, let's start with the basics. What is a moot court? Now, all of you are students of law. Most people who enter the legal profession want to become lawyers because that's what we've seen in terms of all our TV shows. Suits is one example, and you have all these glamorous shows where the legal profession and Sunny Deol with his 2.5 kilo ka haath in the courts and everything, it's a very glamorized profession. The practice of law on media is very different from what it takes, how it happens in the real world. In the similar manner, mooting is also very different from the practice of law. You have half an hour to present your case in a moot court. In a court of law, you will probably have a couple of minutes before the judge loses interest in what you are trying to say. But given that you're starting out, the moot courts have been designed as an exercise where you would get to experience what arguing is, how to present your case, how do you deal with judges who are not willing to listen to what you have to say, how to put your point forward even when the bench is asking you so many questions. So therefore, these are all things which a moot teaches you. Now, in my student life, I loved to moot for 2 things. One, it gave us attendance, so we didn't have to attend as many lectures. I'm sorry, the teachers aren't going to be very happy about me saying that. But the second part was, it was so fun, because I knew from the start that there is no way that I can practice law in a different manner, but from being an advocate, arguing cases in courts of law. A lot of people join firms, a lot of people even take up the profession of teaching, and then you have all these different streams working in-house with the company, which is now opened up, where you can actually put your law degree to use. But mooting is one sphere which gives you feel for the court craft and gives you an experience of what it is like in a court of law. Now, what are moot courts? Moot courts may be your intra-moots, which are compulsory, which you must do within your institution itself. You compete against your fellow students and you try and understand what basic argument is like. And then you have national moot courts, where you have teams from across the country, from different law schools, taking part for one coveted prize. And then you have international moots, where you have national rounds. The teams that win in India go on to represent their country, and then you compete on a much larger scale. So these are the basic three kinds of moots, but the nature of each competition changes dramatically. The level of competence required to compete in each changes, the amount of research, the work that you need to do changes, and your caliber obviously then needs to keep growing as you move on in these moots. Now, if you're in your first year or your second year and you're new to moot courts, you would perhaps have an idea of what a moot is. You may have done an intra-moot, an introductory moot, but you don't really know the dynamics of what a moot court truly is. So you would come across different kinds of moots. Everyone's heard of Jessup, everyone's heard of Stetson. These are the two biggest moot courts in the country today, in the world actually. Jessup's, again, international law. Stetson's is international environmental law. And then you have this, you have arbitrations, you have other moots. Manfred Lachs is one, space law. These are all moots which were quite popular back in my days as well. And I think they're still as popular as they were when I was in law school. It's been 11 years, but I still feel connected to the world of mooting. And that is why I'm more than happy when they asked me to come here to come speak to you. Now, when you're in your first or second year, you want to pick a moot. You have options such as civil law, you have criminal law, you have constitutional law, you have international law. And then with the advent of new laws such as the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, you have people who are doing IBC moots, you have people who are doing niche moots, which are very, very particular one field of law. Now, an interesting tidbit is that back in the day when moots used to happen, there would be colleges who would do it, there would be societies who would do it, but they would do it on fundamental issues, on constitutional issues, on huge important issues which they wanted students to deliberate upon. What recently started happening was that firms which were, for example, working on a very high stake insolvency and bankruptcy code matter. Now, you've all heard of the IBC code and how it's been brought in to streamline industries which are not doing well and maybe restructure them. But the impact of all of this is huge. So if you're an industrialist and you've been running a 300,000-400,000 crore company and suddenly you are unable to pay the amount which the bank demands from you, you're short on your installments or you've exceeded your credit limits, etc., the banks come after your company and you lose control of your company suddenly. So this is really high stake litigation. So you have a lot of these firms which have been engaged to represent those industries. So these firms then started picking up the issue of law which was current, which they were arguing in court, and making it into a moot court competition. What this would do is that they would harness the collective power of the students across the country who would work on that one small subject of law. They would get all the research from you students, and then they would use that research in cases which they were actually fighting in court. So these are how moot courts in the recent past have changed, where they've actually gone from being mere academic exercises to actual deliverable research, which is then used in courts to argue cases. Now, it's another matter that they don't credit the research that you guys do and bring forth in moots. But this is something which happens. So therefore, going back to if you're in your first or your second year, you're new to mooting, what kind of moot should you choose? Should you choose an international law moot? Should you choose constitutional law, a civil law, perhaps a matrimonial dispute? So in my experience, the easiest moot to do or to cut your teeth on is a simple breach of contract related problem or a matrimonial dispute, because the law on these subjects is extremely settled. So therefore, if you ever have to prepare for a moot like this, all you need to do is go to the library, pick up whichever is the most popular journal or digest. It'll give you a nice compilation of case law under different head. For example, if you want maintenance, under the section for maintenance, you'll get a nice collection of case law, which you can just simply pick up and then argue your case. It's easy. It doesn't need a lot of research. And in fact, with time, you would realize that what took you, say, about 2 weeks to prepare has started taking you less than 1 week as you gain experience in researching. Now, given these different kinds of moots and different kinds of spheres that they operate in, the kind of research that you do for each moot is completely different. So before we go to what kind of research we do, let's go back to the top and go to the proposition, because now we're going to address how are you to prepare for a moot court competition. Now, the first thing that you get whenever you get a moot court invite is the proposition. The proposition is the Bible. It's the be all and end all of your case. And that is what is going to drive the entire 2 or 3 months of your life that you're preparing for that competition. Now, when you get your moot court proposition, a lot of people read that once, decide, oh, this is a constitutional problem, oh, this is an international law problem, oh, this is a contract law problem, and they have a basic understanding of the facts, and then they start researching the law that problem talks of. For example, if it's a constitutional issue, for example, I am challenging a certain kind of reservation. So therefore, what students will do is they will start researching law on reservation, on constitutional judgments which have upheld reservation or have said you can not have it more than 50%, the creamy layer principle, and all those different things. And then the focus will immediately shift to preparation. But what you must do is read the proposition, determine what kind of law is applicable, and then again read the proposition. And then keep reading it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. And once you've read the proposition enough, and I'm sure you've been told keep reading the proposition, but you think I've read it once, what's the point? The point is that when you go for a competition and you're arguing before a judge or even in real world, you cannot be expected to know the entire law on the subject. It does not happen in a moot court. It does not happen in a real court of law. But what you're supposed to know are the facts. You cannot make a mistake on facts. So therefore, once you have your facts, you know how that fact links to the law. That is the most important point, because a proposition can have a huge story and then have a relatively small issue at the end, which is your problem. In some moot court competitions, the facts will not be as relevant because it's a issue-based proposition. For example, if the issue is reservation, then it doesn't really matter if Ram's family had 2 brothers or 5 brothers or 6 brothers and whether one of them had died or not. That entire story, which may have been given in the first 5 pages, becomes because it is the point of law that you're arguing. But there will be competitions where propositions are really well made. And these well-made propositions have a tie-in with the facts. If you can identify where that link between the fact and the law is, half the battle is won, because most teams have not. They have fallen into the trap of researching the law before they research the facts. I'll give you an example. This was the year 2012 or 2013. This was a time when Bitcoin wasn't something which people were aware of. We were making a proposition, I think it was for the Army Institute of Law. And while making that proposition, we thought we should make it on a completely new subject. So we picked up Bitcoin as an issue. The issue was how a ransom was paid in Bitcoin and how the person who was dealing in Bitcoin was arrested, whether it was legal, it wasn't legal, whether the RBI was going to intervene. But what we did in the proposition was we added a link in which the father of the girl who was affected was on a certain RBI post. And that was the person who was also responsible for issuing notifications with regard to trading in digital currencies, bitcoins, because there was not a lot of litigation or notifications for virtual currencies like Bitcoin back in the day. Only one team was able to pick that fact and come out with the proposition that the girl's father who was being affected, and whatever that story was, has a link so deep that changed the complexion and changed the motivations with which a certain notification, fictional at that point in time, was issued by that man. Otherwise, what was happening was that man was issuing a notification banning Bitcoin because he wanted the man who was dealing in Bitcoin to be jailed. But here was a team which was able to show that he issued that notification with malice because he wanted that man to go to jail for assaulting his daughter or whatever that story was. So sometimes the facts can be as relevant to the law as anything, and you may not even see it. So therefore, your facts. Then next is, once you have the facts, you need to make your version. Because when you're arguing, there will be your version of the case. That according to you, if you're the petitioner, this is how the story went down. And as the respondent, your version will be completely different. That is why there is so much debate on how to write your statement of facts in your memorial. Because you don't really know whether you want to slant it this way or that way. So therefore, work on your versions. Once you have a version in place, argue that version before a friend or a researcher. So if, for example, you have a team of 3 people, you have 2 speakers and a researcher, or you have 2 researchers if you're a team of 5 or whatever it is. Because all of you have worked on that subject, one speaker presents his version to the rest of the team, and then the other speaker presents the respondent version to the rest of the team. And mind you, this is before you have even made a memorial, you've even started legal research. Right now, you're only at the stage where you're presenting your version as you think fit, because you are interpreting certain facts in a manner. Once you've done that and the other side has tried to pick holes in your story, you will realize where you were weak and where you were strong. Once your story is in place, that is when you start researching. Because at the end of the day, law and research is only support for your facts. Never forget that. You can only cite law in support of fact. You can never cite law in abstract. That is what a lot of people do. Even when you start arguing, you go, these are my issues, and in the case of so-and-so, so-and-so, the Supreme Court said something. Please don't do that, because it makes no sense to the judge. I'll address these questions. I've seen a question which says whether maintainability should be an issue. Let me just address that in the end. Now, I'm sorry I said please interrupt me, but I've realized that if I start answering questions in the middle, it will just break my chain of thought. So let me just get back to that in the end. Now, I was at... Yes, when you cite a particular law, you must apply it to the facts. So therefore, when you're arguing, the first thing you will say, this has what has happened, which prompted us to do this, and this action is justified in law. This is the legal provision. The first thing that you rely upon is statute, if there is such statute. If there is no statute, it's only then that you go back to the judgments. So you cite your facts, and in support you cite your law. That is the basic system in which you will cite law. Now, you have your versions in place. You've done your mock debates between your team members. You found law to support whatever you wanted to argue. So you've found law. The next step is to now start making your memorials. You will identify your issues from the statement, from the proposition. You will make those into issues, and then you will divide them in a manner which is which gives both speakers about an equivalent time, But if one of you wants a slightly longer duration, then define that right in the beginning so that 2 days before the moot court, you don't have a situation where both speakers want 20 minutes. That is something which will not really help you as a team. So make sure that you've talked over this aspect with your teammates right at the beginning. Once you have your memorials, which have all your law in place, your judgments, your foreign judgments, your commentaries, whatever you wanted to cite, once you've cited all of that in your memorials, keep those memorials at a side. This is not advice which a lot of people will give you, but my experience first as a participant in moot courts and subsequently when I had the opportunity of being on the other side and judging moots, I have realized that a moot court is actually two competitions. One is an oral competition in which you speak, and the other competition is your memorials. Sometimes if your research is great, then you can win both. But a lot of times you should consider them as separate. Make your memorials in a manner which you think will give you the best memorial prize. But don't copy the arguments that you have made in the memorials verbatim when you're arguing. That never works because you will never be able to capture the attention of the court. Your memorials are super detailed. You cannot start reading whatever has been written in the memorial and hope to win a moot court. So make your memorials in a manner which you think will help you win, but don't rely on your memorials for your arguments. 1 week or 2 weeks, or depending on how much time you have before your oral arguments, take your memorial, identify the top 5, 6, 7, 8 cases which you will be referring to from your memo, or points which you will refer to. For example, you've reproduced something from the compromis, etc. And at that point in time, start making your arguments on a fresh piece of paper. Some people want to learn the entire 15 minutes and mug it up and then go narrate it orally. If you can do that, great. But don't learn it, understand it. Because the moment a judge interrupts you and asks you to go to a different topic in your memorial and your presentation is derailed, you should be able to jump back and forth. So what I personally did, and what I still do as a lawyer, is take one piece of paper and put my entire case down on that one sheet. You write what are your basic submissions, what page numbers of the memorial they are referred to, where certain cases that you are citing are on your memorial along with the footnotes so you can give the citation, etc. So when you argue, you can keep drawing the attention of the judges to your memorial. That is how you keep them engaged in looking at whatever you've already written, reading what you've written, and also listening to you. One advantage of doing this is that the judge doesn't get a lot of time to think and counter question you. This helps maintain your flow because nobody wants to be interrupted when you're arguing. But judges do exactly that today. How do you avoid that? Keep them busy. Keep showing them one page, the other page, your argument, and keep them engrossed and entertained that they don't have the time to get bored of whatever you've been saying, think of a question on their own, stop you and derail your entire argument. So you've done your oral arguments, you've done your memorials, now you go and talk to your seniors or people who've done moots. Make them as mock judges, argue in front of them. That is absolutely essential because when people who haven't read the proposition in as much detail question you, you will get an understanding of the kind of questions you may get from the judges. The one thing which you must remember is not every judge reads the proposition entirely and comes to sit as a judge. It is unfortunate. It is a disrespect to the hard work that you have done for the past 2, 3, 4 months in preparing for that moot to be judged by somebody who does not even bother to read the proposition. But that is the reality. We all have busy lives as much as we want. Sometimes we do not read the proposition completely. Some people try. I certainly do. Some try but fail and some don't even bother. Now, if you are arguing a technical issue before somebody who does not have any idea of what the proposition is, you will never be able to win. Unfortunately, half of, I would say almost 80% of your argument is who is your judge. That is why this is more difficult for the first speaker of the petitioner side, because the moment the first speaker starts presenting his or her case, the judges will either listen to what they have to say, ask counter questions, do a mix of both. But while doing all this exercise, speaker number 2 and 1 and 2 for the respondent understand the psyche of the judge, whether these are people who know their law, who know the subject, who know the facts, who like questions, who like to keep it interactive, or are they people who are more likely to passively listen. I'm seeing a lot of questions with regard to how to frame a memorial. Can I just come back to it towards the end when I tackle the questions? I will certainly look at memorials as well. So when you're trying to understand the nature of the judge, I've come across 2 or 3 basic modules or kinds of personalities you will deal with. Number 1 are ex-mooters, people who have mooted, who have passed out of law school, who've graduated, who have now come back to become moot court judges, and they're giving back to the institution that they haven't gained enrichment from. Those people will ask you the most number of questions. They will read the proposition and come. They will not want to let you speak. They will speak more than you speak in the 15 minutes that you get. Those are people who will actually bring out the best in you, because that is where your 3 months of knowledge is actually useful in answering each and every question that they have. There will be another set of judges, perhaps people like me, who are ex-mooters but who have passed out of law school a few years ago, and therefore they do not have the same vigor to keep stopping you and asking you questions, because with age people start seeing students slightly differently. There is a tendency of older people to let the students speak more. So if you have somebody who's a lawyer, it's been a few years since that person mooted, then that person will want to question you, but will also be willing to listen to you. And these are people who will be very, very solid on the law and the procedure, because they practice law in the real world. So again, you will get an opportunity of using the knowledge that you've gained in these last 2-3 months, and you will put it to good use. The third category would be academicians, maybe professors, maybe people who are teaching in universities, working on research papers, who are not either actively practicing law in court and have not been mooters, and yet are still associated with the legal profession or teaching in some manner. These are people who will not want to question you too much, but will want to listen to what you have to say. Here is when you will sometimes feel that teams which were not as well prepared in terms of law or research, but because their English was better and their diction was better and their flow was better, are somehow winning the moots, even though they were talking complete nonsense. It did not even make sense what they were saying, and yet there were these people who were getting away with half the amount of research that you had. It'll be very frustrating, and fortunately that does not happen all the time, and we have some excellent academicians and people who are not actively practicing law who also become judges. But a lot of times you will have people who are passive. Arguing in front of a passive judge is one of the most difficult things you will ever do in mooting or when you graduate and become lawyers. For the simple reason you have no feedback. When we talk as humans, we rely on visual feedback, sometimes even more than verbal feedback. I may be cracking a joke, and if I had all of you in front of me in person, I would understand if I am being receptive, if I have the crowd or the judge with me. That is something which is missing from a completely silent bench. So be on your guard, keep your presentation as polished as possible, and here cite law more than you cite fact. Cite fact, but also sprinkle in those celebrated cases of Supreme Court, celebrated cases of ICJ, and nuggets like these, because some judges are looking for those when they are wanting to mark you. For ex-mooters and lawyers, your facts and your interpretation of how the fact and the law meet will be more important than perhaps citing some obscure celebrated case without showing how it's directly applicable to your case. So therefore, half of your advocacy is trying to understand what kind of judge you're against. Now, the last part is the most tricky part. Sometimes what will happen is that you have a bench of 2 or 3 different people, which is comprised of one ex-mooter, one lawyer, and one academician or somebody who is not associated with law practice or mooting to the extent that you would have hoped for. This is a bench where you have a mixture and you don't know what to do. Therefore, your job becomes even more difficult to try and understand when the judges, after the round is over, when they'll sit down and want to mark you. Do you think there will be one judge who would have, say, control over the bench and be able to tell the other 2 people that I think this team won? If that is the case, then your job becomes to win that one particular individual over. If you won somebody like that over, that person is enough to ensure victory for you, because then he will take it upon himself or she will take it upon herself to convince the other 2 people that these people deserve to win. Having said that, do not ever make the mistake of only arguing by looking into one person's eyes. The other 2 judges will not like it. It is as much an ego play as it is a question of whether you're making good arguments or not. You have to take the entire bench with you. That means looking into the eyes of each and every judge and answering their questions. Even if asked by one judge, you look at each one of them and answer that one particular question. This ensures that all the judges in the panel feel connected to what you were saying. They have a personal stake in your argument and that you are reaching out to them. So therefore, try and identify the kind of bench, try and identify who is more dominant on that bench, but take all people on the bench together. This is how you will win a moot, in addition to obviously good arguments and research. Now, you have done all of this and then you've prepared well and then you're there, you're hopeful. But then there is one factor which can sometimes play a huge role, which is location. Where are you? Are you mooting in northern India? Are you mooting in southern India? Are you mooting in eastern India? Is it in Bombay? Is it in MP? All of these local factors also change the manner in which judges operate, in the manner in which you're supposed to prepare your arguments, because there will be a local bias somewhere or the other. Teams, when they come from South India to North India, sometimes believe that there is a bias against them because the judges here do not perhaps understand their English accent as well. And then when teams from North India go to South India, they have the same problem. So therefore, there are these prejudices, in my experience. They're only in the minds of the teams, but they are something which you should consider but not be bogged down about, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to ensure that the person who is the best prepared, has the best argument, wins. So take the local flavor into account, but don't think that prejudices are going to win you or lose the moot for you. I personally, I participated in the National Trial Advocacy at Kochi. This was back in the 2008, 2009. At that point in time, this was one of the first moots that I was doing in South India, and we were very, very skeptical if our loud North Indian style of advocacy will be accepted because of completely different cultures, etc. But to my surprise, not only was it accepted. We got so much love and affection from the students of Kochi that it was one of the most memorable trips of my life, and we ended up pretty much sweeping the entire competition and winning everything. And a lot of the credit for that goes to how welcome we felt there. So therefore, your prejudices, they may play a role, but they should not be your defining traits. Now, after having considered all of this, I think I can move on to questions, unless you want me to specifically talk of a particular facet of moot courts or something of the sort. If yes, then you can please let me know in the comment section. But otherwise, Mr. Mehta was very kind enough to send me a list of about 26 questions, which I already have. And once I have run through these questions, what I will do is I will come to the chat box and then I'll start picking up questions from the chat box and replying to them. So the first question that I have was how to do efficient research for a moot problem. Excellent question, because the manner in which you will do research will change with every single proposition. Is it a matrimonial or a civil law dispute where law has actually been settled by and large by the Supreme Court? In a case like this, it will be counterintuitive for you to start looking at websites such as Manupatra or Westlaw or other SEC Online and these databases for research which have a keyword based research system, because the law is so clear that if you pick up a single digest on that subject, you will get the entire case law without having to even research on Manupatra. So therefore, for a moot court where law is settled, go to the library, go to your digests, because they will give you the law in a very, very succinct manner, and half of your work becomes easy. Once you have those 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 judgments which you've picked up from those digests, go to Manupatra, take the citation or the name of that case, put it into Manupatra and see if that case has been relied upon recently. Take out the top 2 or 3 cases which have been most recently relied upon by the High Court or the Supreme Court. So this way, when you're arguing, you say, I have a celebrated case of so and so, which as recently as 2020 March has been relied upon by, for example, the Honorable Punjab and Haryana High Court in this case. So therefore, you have the best of both worlds without working hard. Second, now you have international law moot courts like Stetson and Jessup, which have a huge amount of research that you can do. So how do you go about these moots? Now, I'll take the example of Stetson because that's the one I am most familiar with. It's an environmental law proposition. In the proposition, they will refer to 4 or 5 different treaties and 4 or 5 different multilateral treaties which may have been signed. Now you pick up those treaties, you read from those treaties and you understand that particular provision of that particular treaty. Once you have done that, then do a simple Google search to try and identify how many cases have there been, for example, before the ICJ pertaining to that particular clause of that particular treaty. That will act as a funnel and get you to a much narrower field of research. Once you have that field of research, then you start going to specialized databases like Westlaw and international research, where you start finding cases, research papers from which then you learn and understand where to take your argument and build from. Now, if you are doing a moot which is on an extremely current proposition of law, for example, an IBC moot court, your manner of research will change completely, because now you do not really have commentaries which give you an answer, you do not have research papers, and then you don't really have too many of these treaties or laws to even refer to. All that you have to argue now is judge-made interpretations, judge-made law. To get the best of information in this manner, first is your news articles, because websites such as Bar and Bench and Live Law have started reporting virtually daily orders of consequence as news articles. So if you get those first, you will get an understanding of what is happening in the general IBC sphere. Once you have that, then you have Manupatra and all those databases where you can then again start drilling down from there and find your specific issue and address that. The next question is, what are the essentials of a moot preparation? I think I've answered this in the preliminary talk, which is basically read the facts, present your version to your teammates, decide what your version is, and then find law to support that version. If you can't find law to support the version, only then doubt your version and maybe start changing your version. Otherwise, in most cases, if you think your version stands up to cross-examination when you're doing it, doing a mock competition between your own teammates and seniors, then stick by what came to you first. The next is how to improve your spontaneity in a rebuttal round, answering tricky questions instantly. Experience is one, but more than anything, it is how many rounds of mock sessions have you done before the actual moot. Because your teammates and your seniors who've done this have understood how to question you because they know the facts also. So there are chances that more chances than not that those questions which you will face in the rebuttal have already been asked to you when you were doing your mock rounds. Then what are the rules for moot court? I think every competition can have its own rules, but the basics are the same across the board. Sometimes for international moots, you will have small changes such as your excellency instead of your honor or my lord. That's how you just change your manner of speaking, but by and large, the core rules remain the same. Proceedings during the moot court. I think this has been addressed. The main quality is to be in a perfect speaker while presenting the memorial. The number one quality is do not read from your memorial. As far as possible, narrate the case in your own words. You don't have to be the most fluent person, but as long as you are narrating your case without reading, it will force the judge to listen to you because you are making eye contact. And therefore, that is when you will get through to the judge better than any other time. So therefore, read very, very, very little. Keep a short note of your basic points with you, and then try and restrict yourself to that one note from which you make your entire argument. Then, to what extent does citing authorities' case law necessary in the memorial? Does citing too many case laws make sense in actual practice? If no, why is there such a marking system for moot court competitions? I think this is a great question. This is why I believe that a moot court is actually two competitions. One is you are fighting for your best memorial prize, and the other is your oral arguments. They may overlap because the scores get combined, but very few times will you have a situation where writing a footnote which is bigger than your pleadings is actually going to win you a oral round. You do not need too many case law when you're arguing, because if there is even one case of the Supreme Court, that case is binding on the court. They cannot ignore that. So therefore, it does not make a difference if you have 5 cases saying the same thing or one case saying the same thing. But because this is not real world practice and they want to see your ability to research as well, that is why in moots they insist on having a more number of cases cited. So therefore, what you can do is pick one celebrated case or main case, and then you can cite a couple of cases which have recently relied upon that case. That's justified. But when you're making your moot court memorial, make it in a manner as if you just want to win the best memorial. How do you enhance mooting skills? I think mooting skills, half of mooting skills are confidence, the ability to speak in public without hesitation, and your desire to pick a intellectual, thoughtful fight with the opposite side. So if you do debates, if you do your parliamentary debates and your mock sessions and extempores and all those things, they will obviously help your mooting skills because they'll give you the confidence to speak your mind. And a lot of times, I've seen that a lot of teams, when questions come from the judges, believe that the questions are adversarial simply because they've been used to hearing judges question them and be against them. So when you're listening to a question, decide if the judge is actually against you or is giving you a hint towards an argument you can build. Just because it is coming from a particular judge, do not assume that that question is against you. So therefore, one of the most important essentials of a good mooting skill is to listen to the judge to see if the judge is with you, against you, giving you a hint, etc. Research for the moot and practical research for the case, relation and key point to do it. I think we've covered research, but I like the fact that the person who's asked the question has split research into two heads: legal research and practical research. I think a lot of times practical research is severely lacking because I'll give you the example of an environmental law moot court. For example, there is a particular crab which is going extinct because of overfishing that a particular country is doing. So the other country is making an allegation that you're overfishing this particular crab, and that is why it is dwindling, and therefore they've dragged the other country for environmental damages before the ICJ, and there are all sorts of disputes. Now, a lot of people will research the law, but not a lot of teams will research that crab. Are there other factors which are affecting the numbers of those crabs? Is it only a factor of overfishing, or are there pollutants also which are destroying the population? Is there a genetic problem that that particular species is facing? So today, if you are able to identify a scientific explanation for what is happening, which is different from what the other country is arguing before the court, you have made a very, very strong point, because then you will have research in your memorial to back it up, and suddenly the other team, which is not prepared on the scientific or practical aspects of that problem, will have a problem, because they will have no answer. They have no research on whether there are any environmental factors which are dwindling the crab population. And there is where you've scored a huge point. So which is as important as legal preparation. Then the next point is drafting and its importance, how to be perfect at drafting. The importance of drafting in oral rounds, when you're mooting especially, is limited for the simple reason that in most colleges, the people who are judging your oral rounds will not be the ones who are judging your memorials. 99% of the times when the judges walk in, they see your memorials lying on the table for the very first time. And if you have started arguing and they're talking to you, engaging with you, they have not had a large amount of time to go through your memorial. But having said that, every single judge will pick up that memorial once and try and glance through it. In doing so, they will subconsciously decide whether you're a good team or a bad team. There'll be a number of factors. One is whether your formatting is in order. Does your memorial look professional? Have you used small things such as capital letters for names? Have your paras been justified properly? Does it seem like a professional memorial? Have you cited case law? Have you divided your issues in a manner which is fair, which represents what the case is? So an initial impression of the kind of team you are, whether you're a good team or a bad team, will come from your memorial. But that will not be the be all and end all. And if you're excellent at oral arguments, your memorial will not hold you back. How long should a presentation be? I think you divided, you get 30 minutes in the preliminary rounds, which I think increases to about 45 minutes if you've made it the quarters and the semis. So you have about 30 minutes, then you split that between your speakers, 12 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever your split is, and then you reserve a couple of minutes for rebuttal. It's a good idea to not reserve more than about 2 minutes for rebuttal, because if you actually have good things to say at the time of rebuttal, even if you have only 2 minutes left, the judge will be willing to listen to you. So at that point in time, getting a little bit of extra time will not be as hard. So don't restrict yourself to 10 minutes in your initial submissions and keep 10 minutes for a rebuttal. Because by that time, a lot of judges have already started marking the score sheets. And if they've already marked you poorly, your rebuttal may not be able to change the entire scoring. So take your time, but don't keep too much time for rebuttal. How long, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career? Oh wow, this is a tough one, but I'd say keep doing what you're doing, because when you're young, there's only so much advice you're willing to take from older people, because you have this feeling that I know better, and old man, your time's gone. So I don't know if young students want to take a lot of advice. So yeah, let's play PUBG. That's the advice I'd probably give them as well. What if no precedents case laws could be found while preparing a particular argument? Would it be enough to keep our point without any relevant case law? Of course, there will be a lot of points in which you do not have any legal precedent because the law is just so new, or the issue that you have raised is absolutely brand new. So how do you convince the judge? The answer to that is logic. Is your argument logical? If it is logical, it will have basis in scientific fact. Maybe the law does not support it, but the law recognizes equity. And equity allows a judge to look at scientific evidence, to look at good conscience, probability, logic. So all those things can definitely be relied upon. But for the purposes of moot courts, there will be very seldom issue on which you have absolutely no case law, because you will always have something which you will be able to rely upon. It may not be directly on that particular subject, but there will usually be an analogy that you will be able to draw from an older case. Then please tell in detail about the working of the court, and especially how one frames issues for pleading the case. For most propositions, the framers of the proposition would have given you core issues. So therefore, in the last two paragraphs, if you just read them, you will get your core issues from there. Then it's simply a matter of dividing it amongst yourselves, and then choosing who wants to be the first speaker and who wants to be the second speaker. How to cope up with performance anxiety? Performance anxiety during moot courts is normal, happens to anyone and everyone. Don't really think that it's something which only happens to you. It happens to the best of us. You can become a senior advocate practicing before the Supreme Court, but just before you start an argument, you may have jitters as well. So jitters are okay, nervous energy is okay. More likely would be a situation where the moment you start arguing and your first 2 or 3 minutes have passed, you will forget about the anxiety and be engrossed in your arguments. Once you do that, anxiety becomes immaterial. Otherwise, the judges aren't your enemies. They're just trying to get the best out of you. Even if they're asking questions in a manner which is slightly, let's just say, provocative or argumentative or aggressive, they're just trying to claw the surface and see what you're made of. They're just trying to get the best out of you. So don't think of them as adversaries. They aren't there to make you cry. They'll ask questions and they'll go back home. So don't worry about judges. You know what your case is, argue. And if you do not have a lot of case law, it's okay. You can concentrate on the facts, because there is no excuse for not knowing facts. Argue the case on facts, make your submissions confidently and go back. No problem. How to cope up with the performance anxiety during moot court competition? This one's done. How to present facts? Interesting question. I personally believe that a lot of speakers, when they start arguing, the first thing they say is, if your lordships are familiar with the facts of the case, may I move on to the issues? And most likely the judges say, yes, we are aware of the facts, and then they move on. I personally would want to argue differently, because the moment I start my argument, I want to capture the attention of the judge and to tell him why I am here and why is this case being heard. To do that, it is an obvious requirement that you will have to give the judge a number of facts, which is, today the issue before this court is whether the Antarctic krill, for example, is being overfished in the South China Sea, and the two countries who are raising this issue are X and Y, and they are raising it because X accuses Y of overfishing and Y is denying it. This is your facts and your issues in one paragraph. One 1 minute line has taken the judge through the core issues, through the core facts, and you've given a slant to your presentation as well. Because you can even start with, the other country has wrongly accused my country or whoever you are appearing for of XYZ, and that is why we are before this court. Next, how do you answer the question whether the plea is maintainable in the court, which is often asked? Yes, this is certainly something which comes up. This is true for national moots as well as for international moots. For national moots, if you've in a writ petition come to the Supreme Court and the High Court also has jurisdiction in to entertain a writ petition, then your answer can only be can be a number of things, but it can draw on a couple of things to begin with. The first is whether the Supreme Court has jurisdiction. The answer to that in most cases is yes. Then, is there a conflicting judgment that two different high courts have given? If that be the case, that's a very clear answer to justify why you've come to the Supreme Court and why not go to one high court, because it's the job of the Supreme Court to settle contradictions between versions in two different high courts. Then, if you're in an international forum, you can perhaps say, the question can be asked, why should the ICJ entertain this case, and why not you do it domestically or through some other forum? So the answer to that question is, in the ICJ, you come to the ICJ in most cases through joint pleading, where both countries have agreed to submit to the jurisdiction. Both countries have agreed to draw up a compromise, which is a statement of facts, and submit it. Therefore, once the other side is not raising the issue of maintainability, which is clear from the fact that you have actually entered into this compromise, it is not appropriate for the court to then ask you. But if the judges still ask you, your answer is, we have submitted to the jurisdiction and so has the other side, so therefore this issue is not being traversed for the purpose of this argument. How to cope up with performance anxiety? I think we've kind of covered this earlier as well. Don't have performance anxiety. You may not do well in one moot court, you'll do well in the next one. If not, then the next one. Just keep doing moots, keep doing your debates. One day or the other, I'm sure you'll do well. So it's only a question of experience. Don't worry about it. How to present facts? I think we've done that. How to answer the question whether plea is maintainable? What do you look for in a candidate while hiring someone? I don't really know if it's a moot court related question, but if you're going out for internships and you're looking at litigation as an option, then one of the first things that lawyers will probably want from young juniors is an ability to draft well, because that is something which is a burden when you're making arguments which seniors want to share with their juniors, and that's the kind of work you will get initially. If you research well and you draft well, more seniors will want to engage you, and that will then give them also confidence to let you appear in courts and argue cases because they think that you're up to the mark. So research and draft well. If you can draft well, that's half the battle won. How do you convince the judge? That's the trickiest question of them all. I don't really know how you can convince the judge because it really depends on who the judge is. So the only thing which I can tell you is observe the judge, look at how he is reacting to the petitioner or the respondent, and try and understand what his psyche is, and then tailor your arguments according to that psyche. If that person likes more of case law, bombard him with case law. If that person likes an engaging argument, give him the facts. So, or if you think this is a judge who's not going to ask any questions and is deciding whether you win or lose on the basis of your English, then try and be as fluent as you possibly can. How to build confidence for a moot court. This is one of the tricky subjects, but I can share a personal example with you. It is very, very important to be relaxed when you go for a moot court. Think of a moot court as a party that you are getting the opportunity to go to, and how do you make the most of that party should be your goal. I can give you an example. I think I was in my second or my third year, it was perhaps the second year, I had gone for a moot court along with my teammates. I think one of whom has also taken a lecture for you, Professor Jakteshwar Sohi. So he and me used to be batchmates, and we went for a moot court to VIPS in Delhi. So at that point in time, the year before that, they used to do a criminal law moot, and a team from our college had done really, really well. They were, I think, runners up, and VIPS at that point in time used to have a pretty decent cash awards, like 40,000 rupees. That's a lot of money back in 2007, 2006, 50,000 bucks or whatever it was. So, and when they'd won, or that they were runners up, they'd done a huge party for the organizers, and it was a very fun night. So our college had gotten the reputation of being these party boys who would come have a good time as well. So the next year when we went to that same college for the criminal moot, it was a different team. Our seniors were not there with us, but that reputation had carried. And this was the time when the World Cup was going on, and Pepsi had come out with Pepsi Gold. So we'd not tried Pepsi Gold, but since this was Delhi and we were in Chandigarh, so we'd gone to Delhi, we picked up Pepsi Gold, and we'd ordered paneer pakoras because every one of us was a foodie. We were eating, and then there were these people who'd come to our hotel room, the organizers, and they actually thought that we were having alcohol one day before the moot, because the Pepsi Gold in our hand was like a glass of alcohol, and the paneer pakoras were a complete giveaway. And then we had such a laugh at the Pepsi Gold's expense that the entire environment changed into these very super friendly vibes, where we actually thought we were here for a party. And from that day onwards, we thought, why think of a moot as a competition which gives you so much stress? If the organizers think that you can come here and have a drink and take part in a moot court competition the next day, then so should you. So therefore, I do not encourage you to drink. We were also having Pepsi, but have a good time when you go for moots. Study at night. I used to prepare my arguments one night before the moot court, but that doesn't mean there should be any pressure on you. Don't take pressure, because at the end of the day, this is not an adversarial exercise. If you don't win that moot court competition, it will not be the end of the world. Back to a slightly more serious subject, which is what is better after LLB, judiciary or LLM. It entirely depends on you. If you have the desire to study for maybe 8-9 hours a day, that's what people tell me that they studied for in order to crack the judicial exams, then do it. If you do not have the ability to sit for 10 hours to study on the trot, I certainly didn't. I did not even think of giving the judicial exams. I was happy to practice law. Now, whether or not an LLM is required to practice law, no, because almost nothing is learnt in law school in terms of practical application. So when you're starting practice of law, it doesn't matter if you hold an LLM, it doesn't matter if you hold an LLB only, because you don't know anything. You will learn on the job. So an LLM, for the purposes of practicing, not needed. If you can afford to do the LLM and you can wait for a couple of years or a year to start your practice or do whatever, then do it, because it's easier to do your LLM before you have started working. Once you start working, it is very difficult to go back and do an LLM. I had initially thought I would do that myself and I'd take a year or 2 years off, but it doesn't really work out that way. So if you can do it then and there while you're in the habit of studying and giving exams, once you start working, it most likely won't happen. How to present memorials effectively? The memorial question. Now, the memorials are an important fact, like I said, because they give the first impression of whether you're good or bad as a team to the judges who are judging you in your oral rounds, as also determine your memo scores, which then gets added to your oral rounds and therefore contributes to your score. Now, a good memorial is one which looks professional. So the memorial should not be very gaudy, but it should be professionally made. So therefore, if you're going for example, in environmental or moot court competition, try and use recycled paper, because that shows some sort of consciousness towards the environment as well. Or these are small little things which help distinguish your memorial from the rest of the teams. Then format your memorial really well. Formatting is very important for a professional look. If your paragraphs are properly justified, your alignment is in place, your spacing is perfect, your head notes and your headlines are in the right font, the first impression that it creates is a lasting impression. Obviously, then categorize your issues well and spend some time writing your summary of arguments. A lot of the teams write the summary of arguments in the last half hour before memo submission, because they pick a couple of paragraphs from your main pleadings and just put it there. But a lot of people may just glance through your summary more than your actual pleadings, because the summary gives the judge an overview of what is being said. So pay a little focus on your summary as well. Then when it comes to citing case law, at least 10 years ago when I was still participating, there was this desire of having 3/4 of the page filled with footnotes and only write your content in the first 1/4 half, because teams somehow thought that filling it with all these footnotes is going to make your memorial win. Unfortunately, it did. I tried it, we won. And I was shocked, because that memorial was, in my understanding, not a very nice memorial, because it did not convey a logical flow of arguments. It only conveyed one fact. We researched well and we've been able to format all of this really nicely and put it there. So even today, I would say maybe there is that desire in the desire for a lot of case law being cited, but I don't think that 1/4, 3/4 formula works anymore. It does not, because people have realized that that's not the be all and end all. So put research into your memorial, put it in the lower half, make it sound like you've cited a number of cases, but don't overdo it. Concentrate on your structure as well. Next question is slightly off topic, but I'm happy to take it. It is career options after law. I think there are a huge amount of options which have opened up. The first thing is obviously to become an advocate. But even in an advocate, you can be practicing at the district courts, at the High Court, at the Supreme Court. Then you can even join a litigation firm. That's a firm which looks at litigation, has some of its associates also litigate court to court, argue cases, but for some of the more high profile or serious cases get outside counsel, which may also include senior advocates. Now, you also then have firms which work on the contract drafting side of things, which is your firms which are taking care of advising clients on mergers and acquisitions, on compliances, on due diligence, on contracts and things like that. That's again not a lot of court work. You never probably even go to court, but you spend time in air-conditioned offices drafting. That's also something which a lot of people want to take up because it's the more high paying of the lot. And then you have your judiciary, but then you also have legal officers, compliance officers in a number of companies which are taking on a much greater role in today's time, where self-compliance has been made mandatory by the government. So you have that as well. And other than that, legal journalism is picking up. A lot of these newspapers and sites like Bar and Bench are actually hiring law graduates to become journalists. And journalism with a legal bent of mind is also great if you're covering intellectual property, patents and stuff like that. So there is some demand for people like that. There is again also demand for law graduates in technical firms which are trying to file patents, etc. So the number of options that you have are immense. I'm not really a career counselor, but I'm sure you'll find people who will be able to help you with this better than I can. And then you have, what is the future of digital courts? Very, very pertinent question. Right now, as you're all aware, courts are all digital. I sit right here and argue my cases every single day before the courts, be it the NCLT, the High Court, the Supreme Court, everyone has gone virtual. So it's a handicap, but you have to do with what you can. You will realize once you start arguing that the profession of law and especially advocacy is a very, very I read a certain comment, so I was distracted, I'm sorry. So you will realize that this is a profession where you rely on body language quite a bit, because you look at how the judge is reacting to your argument, you look at how your opposing counsel is reacting to the argument, and then you tailor your argument accordingly. So therefore, once you have so much of non-verbal communication happening, and then you're suddenly restricted to a virtual court where only you're looking into a camera and arguing, it doesn't really let you argue in the same way that you could otherwise. So digital courts as an emergency option, yes, but I would any day want to go back to physical hearings. How can we access all information online? You have Google, Live Law, Indian Qanun, Manu Patra. Between all of these things and Live Law and Bar and Bench, almost everything of note which is happening in the legal world is available to you. So that's that. Now I've run through the questions which were given to me in advance. I'll try and see if I can find some of the questions that were put in the comment section, or can I just request anyone who still has questions to again type those questions in the chat box. That'll make it much easier for me to look at it and answer it immediately. Just please copy paste the question and put it into the chat box. I'll just have a look at it, because some of the comments that I'm seeing in the chat box are PUBG and not so charitable comments about the webinar so far. Okay, so one question that I've seen from Praful is, how do you research moot problems when the issue has no statute or judicial precedents like cyber attack in international law? Good question, and something which is very relevant as well. Now, the first thing which you'll have to look at is, what is a cyber attack? Can that be described as an attack on the sovereignty or the property of another nation? So if I remotely sitting in India disable the computers of an institution in Pakistan, can that be equated to a missile being dropped on that building which also disables those computers? If you can draw that analogy and the effect is the same, then it does not matter that cyber attack is not defined in a particular bilateral treaty or in the UN Charter or another convention. What is defined is the fact that you have caused harm to property. So therefore, the analogy argument kicks in, and then you can draw an analogy from real world situations to your particular subject, and then cite all the case law which applies to that subject through interpretation. Then in which Simarpreet asks that in which field can we start a moot court? If you're in your first year or your second year and you're just starting out with moot courts, I would say that a matrimonial dispute is one of the easiest to cut your teeth on because the law is established. So there'll be not a lot of research that you'll need to do outside the box, and you will get a feel for arguing the issues and applying the facts as well. A lot of you are asking for samples of memorials. So in terms of samples, one example I can give you is, I think Stetson or Jessup or both publish some of their best memorials on the website. So you can go there, download those particular memorials, and you'll get a look at those memorials. I unfortunately, it's been 10 years, 11 years, or maybe even more, 12 years since I've mooted, so I don't really have my memorials left anymore. So I'm sorry, I can't share them. But I'm sure if you go to these websites, you will have some of these best memorials available for download. So take your cues from there. Agar only minor eyewitness हो then what about the roads? Simran, I don't really understand your question with regard to an eyewitness and their oath. Any witness in terms of procedure who is to appear before a court of law has to swear to tell the truth, and it's unlike the Bible पे हाथ रख के या गीता पे हाथ रख के वाला system. It works just as a solemn oath, and that's pretty much it. How do you make a research paper more effective? I am perhaps not the best person to answer this question because I personally am more keen on arguing than on writing research papers, but I would think that it will be a nice amalgamation of the issue that you're addressing, the understanding that appears in the public domain with regard to that particular issue, and then what is your take and what you think should be the future. If you follow this broad structure, your research paper should read really well. Harleen asks, would it be enough to argue without citing any case law? It should be, but it seldom impresses the moot court judges for the simple fact that there is always an analogy to be made. Even if you don't have a case that directly applies, like in the case of territorial damage, which we just made an analogy about a missile attack and a cyber attack. So you will be able to find corollaries where you can actually bring a different subject in by analogy. So try and do that instead of saying there is no case law and I could not find anything. If you cannot say I cannot find anything, there is nothing, but I have relied on an analogy to support whatever I'm saying. Then the next question is, somebody said I haven't answered their question, but I'm sorry, I've missed the question. Can you please tell me what that question is? Can you please address if the maintainability issues are must? No, maintainability issues aren't a must in every problem, but a lot of the times issue that comes up is when people go in an SLP under Article 136 of the Constitution of India before the Supreme Court. A lot of propositions are framed as if the High Court said this, and then an SLP is being filed before the Supreme Court. And they stop at that. So it's important to understand what is the meaning of an SLP. A SLP is a special leave petition in which you are taking the leave of the court to present that case. So if the court does not give you that leave, which is that permission, you cannot argue that case at all. So how law works is that there are some appeals which are your right. For example, if you lose in the district court, you have a right to appeal before the High Court. But for every situation, you do not have a statutory right to go to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court has a provision under 136 to accept special requests which are in the nature of appeals and then decide them. So how it works is, if the Supreme Court accepts your SLP, it is then that your petition is assigned a civil appeal number. Once your SLP is admitted, you get a civil appeal and then your appeal is heard on merits. So therefore, a lot of times when a maintainability issue is raised, at that point in time, teams will argue that an SLP should not be maintainable because of XYZ reasons, that there is no need to grant this special leave. In those cases, raise the maintainability argument. But if this SLP has already been allowed, then the maintainability argument really loses its value. So constitutional moot, if the vires are being challenged, which is you're challenging the vires of a particular act or a provision saying it is violative of the constitution, very, very, very seldom can the maintainability be questioned. Maintainability question only comes in when two or more different forums have parallel jurisdiction. Can moot courts help you for judicial exams? Not really, not really. The sphere is different, but what they can do is give you an insight into law, which may be useful in your interview when you're appearing for the judiciary, because you will not just know about your 4 or 5, 10 subjects which you've studied, but also about miscellaneous aspects of law which you may have learned through mooting. How to build up confidence in front of judges even if you're wrong. Accept that you are wrong. Don't dig your heels in. If you are wrong, you can tell the court that I am sorry, I stand corrected. It may have escaped my attention or I may have been incorrect, and then move on. It is, you should not dig your heels in when you are wrong and argue with the judge when you know that you are wrong. You will never be able to win a moot because you're arguing with the person who is marking you. It never really yields results. So be honest, say, okay, I don't know, and move on. It's okay. It makes no difference. Never pretend that you know an answer to something which you don't know, because if the judge catches you on that, you've had it. I think I've covered most of everything that you've asked, and we've already exceeded the 1 hour duration. So in case there is nothing else and I don't receive any question in the next 20 seconds, I will wrap this up by thanking the organizers once again, the Department of Law, Government Mahindra College, the principal, Dr. Simrat Kaur, the head of the department, Dr. Joginder Paul, the teacher in charge, Mr. Sanjeev Mehta. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to interact with all of you, and I look forward to seeing you in person and to dispense with this virtual hearing and webinar system once and for all. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.